Not only is Winston Hugh Auden a fine poet, he connects me to both this place and to my former abode, which was Brooklyn, New York. He lived in Brooklyn for a number of years in two houses, and one of them was across the street from where I lived. There's a plaque there. But he also briefly was here in Michigan. He taught a course at the University of Michigan, and on his way there circled through the Midwest and spent a night or two at the Pantland Hotel, where it is said or rumored that he consummated his long love for Peter Pears. But that's another matter. Well, here we are, not at the official but the effective end of summer, which is not all vacation, of course. The tasks of the fall are never very far off, even in July. Languorous days obscure that fact for a while, but only a while. And though the heat is high today and the humidity, have you noticed how late the sun is coming up again? And that the maple is already turning brown and shedding its crown, and it's Labor Day, of course. Summer has been a rich season for me this year. I took 2 weeks of actual vacation in 2 different places. Back in July, one was to the Four Corners region where the states of the Southwest meet. I went there to see my sister, whom I can only see when I go there since she is not mobile anymore, and to lead a weekend seminar for a church in that region. My compensation for that work was a cabin beside a little river, the Los Pinos River, which every morning would be babbling merrily and promised of trout, but not being a trout fisherman, the trout were glad I was there. But I would walk instead, and through the woods I would go, and most every morning would encounter a family, yes, a family of dear mother, father, and child. They looked at me not with anxiety, but more as an uninvited guest, which I was. The other week, I spent with an old college friend, his spouse and mine, up on the Straits of Mackinac, just barely into the Upper Peninsula. It was a lovely time, with a porch that looked over Huron and over to Mackinac Island, and the sun came up wonderfully early and very beautifully. My friend foolishly fed a gull one day, and your laughter tells me that you know what that means. It then perched on our porch daily, screeching loudly for more. Here at home, my adventures were less glamorous, but as you know, if you were here last week, I had a bat in my house one morning. And this past week, when we went to Maryland to see relatives we have not seen for more than a year, we paused on a wetland and heard a sound of croaking frogs and leaned our head into the wetlands, and there, no kidding, were 2 frogs sitting on actual lily pads. Deer, gulls, frogs, and bats, reminding us that we all live in a larger life than we realize most of the time. We're all so absorbed in our human endeavors and think them mightily important, and then we encounter an animal that doesn't care one whit whether we're alive. And those animals help to provoke my thoughts this morning. So may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Of course, between vacation weeks, there was work, plenty of it, too. Planning the annual pledge campaign, and I need anyone who wants to help me with that. It's not onerous, but it is a task that must be done. Arranging for buildings to be repaired. Wesley, Beck, and I have been working constantly, prodding the people forward to get things done. We're trying to get a new website up and running, and of course, as you know, democracy, and we are a democratic place, and our workplace is a collaborative one. Democracy is a slow and inefficient system for getting things done. And of course, we're welcoming new staff. I greet with gladness Elizabeth Barnum, who was our new clergy person, who will give me some sense of comradeship in this task, along with Jason Hubbard. But he's taking the weekend, so we'll all wish him well and then work him very hard when he comes back. So when I think about it, how different could they be, these weeks away in nature with animals and sunrises and beautiful waters and all the work and all the planning and efforts. What could be more different? And that's why my thoughts this morning bring to mind the words of E.B. White, not that you have read already, but ones I have quoted to you before. He says somewhere, if the world were merely seductive, that would be easy. If it were merely challenging, that would be no problem. But I arise in the morning torn between a desire to improve the world and a desire to enjoy the world. This makes it hard to plan the day. Indeed, it's hard to plan the day. Clocks and tasks and deadlines tell us there is work to be done, and time is not to be wasted, but the deer and the gulls and the frogs and the bats keep looking at us saying, why are you in such a hurry through a life that's already so short? As I pondered this perpetual question, I consulted the calendar of sacred readings for Christian and Jewish communities. I do it every week. In case you don't know, in fact, I wrote a weekly commentary on each of them for 2 years. It was great to do that. Yes, most of what's in those scriptures makes almost no sense. Certainly little practical sense, but it has endured because it speaks to longings we all have about the desire to save and savor the world. A well-known passage from the book of Hebrews was on deck today, and that helped me focus my thoughts. You already heard it. Do not neglect to show hospitality before strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. You may have heard that phrase, entertaining angels unawares. It's a little precious, but it's also rather lovely when you think about it, both in word and concept. And it helped me put a little flesh on the bones of this dilemma of the saving and the savoring. It takes me back to a year I did not live, 1897, in a place I did live in Brooklyn, New York, where Dorothy Day was born. And she grew up there and in San Francisco. She was a child in San Francisco in 1906, obviously, when what happened? They had a terrible earthquake and a miserable fire. And then they went to Chicago and worked in that city of the broad shoulders, hog butcher to the world, a place where ironmongery and all sorts of manufacturing went on all the time. And as she became a young person, she was attracted to the promises of the youthful socialist revolutions going on, the unionists everywhere, the Wobblies. She thrived on Upton Sinclair. She joined the International Workers of the World, and after much struggle and soul searching, personally and otherwise, embraced the Catholic Church and the work of a fellow named Peter Maurin, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement. Starting in 1932, they created a newspaper championing the unemployed and the poor, and the magazine still exists. But the office where they were working became important because it was there that the workers who were unemployed, the poor who had no money, came looking for help. In essence saying, well, you're on our side, so can you help me personally? And so she started putting them up in her apartment, which was the office of the newspaper after all. And eventually there were 10 men in one house and 10 women in another. And eventually there were other houses. And that's what they do today. She wrote of that time, mainly there were men, gray men, the color of lifeless trees and bushes and winter soil, who had in them as yet none of the green of hope, the rising sap of faith. Unlike other shelters, no one at the Catholic Worker set about reforming them. They didn't have to hear a sermon or do a good deed or become a Christian or anything. They were there to serve, meaning those who hosted them. And to this day, as it says on their website, a crucifix on the wall was the only evidence of the faith of those welcoming them. And in fact, one can work in a Catholic worker house without being a Roman Catholic or even a Christian. The staff do not receive a salary, only food and board and occasional pocket money. In other words, they are almost as poor as those they serve. And by 1936, there were 33 Catholic worker houses. Dorothy Day died in 1980 after, in the late 70s, doing a stint in jail for protesting U.S. policy overseas. She was a pacifist. There are still now over 200 houses around the world affiliated with the movement, each committed to taking in the stranger that might be an angel unaware. They truly regard their work as doing that. That's why the film about her is titled Entertaining Angels. Now, few of us in this room, I dare say no one in this room has the temperament to live a life such as she did, including myself. But I look to her and others to remind me that there are other ways to live, and that perhaps we can both save and savor the world, because that's what she did. She did both at the same time. We do not have to choose one or the other, because that's really a false choice. It's the result of our times, not our nature. To pick up on what Mandela said, we do not have to choose between saving and savoring, because it is a man-made problem, not one of nature.